Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI, and really what can only be described as a historic day when President Donald Trump, early this morning, Jerusalem time, late last night, Washington time, sent a number of B-2 bombers into Iran to hopefully eliminate and destroy to the greatest extent possible the three main nuclear facilities that the Iranian regime has been building over the years: Natanz, Isfahan, and of course, Fordo. And joining me today is Andrea Stricker, who is the Deputy Director of FDD's Non-Proliferation and Biodefense Program and a research fellow at the Foundation of Defense for Democracy. She's an expert, and I strongly recommend following Andrea on X, Twitter, or on any other platform, because Andrea really is an expert on nuclear weapons proliferation, counter-proliferation, how it works, what it does, what's with Iran's nuclear program. She's co-authored 5 books on nuclear proliferation and strategic commodity trafficking, has advised federal prosecutions, and much, much more. So, Andrea, I'm just really thrilled, and I've had the opportunity to follow you for a number of years, thrilled to finally talk and have you on the show. So thank you so much for joining me. And I really
Thank you
want
for
to just
having
jump
me.
straight into it. Thank you. What has America done, and how do you assess the success of what has happened?
Thanks again for having me, a longtime fan of yours as well. I think President Trump took really decisive action to eliminate likely some of the last vestiges of the Iranian nuclear weapons program after Israel had done a lot of the job over more than a week, seriously damaging the atomic weapons supply chain. We've seen the uranium conversion, the uranium enrichment, as well as the weaponization supply chains all impacted, if not completely eliminated. So I think these decisive acts, first by Israel and then by the United States, are going to be studied for future generations for the leadership, intelligence, the deception campaign involved, and the fact that for more than 2 decades prior, Iran was allowed to get so close to nuclear weapons. And we have our 2 great nations and their alliance to thank for ensuring eventual peace in the region.
So the big question really was going to be about Fordo, right? And Israel, when it embarked on this operation on June 13th, it took out a lot of the missile defense systems, the air defense systems, opened up Iran's skies, and basically today has control of it. It started to try to degrade the ballistic missile program and the stockpiles and focused on the launchers, because launchers is usually like 1 to 10, 1 to 15 or something like that. So much more important, go after the launchers, they can't use the missiles. And it tried to take out the leadership of the military and the IRGC. But Natanz and Isfahan, which it did hit, it left Fordo to see what the Americans were due. Why was Fordo so important? And why do you think that Trump in the end decided to also attack Natanz and Isfahan?
Fordo was originally built for a supply of weapons grade uranium by the Iranians. So it was built in secret, and it was originally called the Al Gadir facility. We know it was revealed in 2009 by Obama, France, and the UK, which demanded that Iran put it under safeguards. Being caught, Iran did that, but the plant has continued advancing all these years, and it's around 60 to 90 meters below a mountain. So it was very difficult for the United States and much more difficult for Israel to stop it, to eliminate it if they needed to. And just to give you an idea of what was in Fordo, it was around 2,700 centrifuges. About 1,000 of those were basic, the IR1 generation centrifuge, and then 1,700, a little over that, were advanced, so they worked a lot faster than the basic ones. The plant had the capability to make about 9 nuclear weapons worth of weapons-grade uranium within a few weeks, and it could make the first amount of that WGU within 2 to 3 days. So it was a significant threat, and I think operationally and symbolically, it's really important that our 2 countries took decisive action to eliminate it.
Do you have do we know, or do you know, how much of gas, how much uranium was actually inside the facility at the time that it was attacked by the Americans?
It's hard to say how much was there because the Iranians may have moved it knowing that strikes were on the way. But I can tell you the total of enriched uranium overall at all of the sites, Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo, was over 9,000 kilograms of enriched uranium at the 5, 20, and 60% levels. And I think with Fordo, we would have likely seen the Iranians moving the 60% highly enriched uranium, knowing that it might have been struck and lost inside. It seems that they were actually moving it to tunnels at the Isfahan location, which were also deeply buried and fortified.
And there also, America has launched part of its attacks, at least we know Tomahawk missiles were launched at Isfahan. Another two of these massive ordnance penetrators, the GBU-57s, right, dropped on Natanz, I guess, to ensure what Israel might not have been able to reach, which was those lower chambers where the main centrifuge halls. Do you have any insights into why that was needed?
It looks from the initial imagery coming out that they hit above the main centrifuge halls at Fordo, and that it likely hit the ventilation shaft. We will have to wait for the full battle damage assessment, but the U.S. From Secretary of Defense Hegseth's briefing this morning, they sound very confident that the plant was completely eliminated, which means everything that was inside it would likely be entombed inside for good.
So let's assume for a moment that Iran's nuclear program has sustained a heavy blow, right? Are you able to, let's say Fordo is significantly damaged, Natanz significantly damaged, Isfahan, the uranium conversion plant, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, that's where they take the raw material, turn it into what's then sent to the centrifuges, into the
Correct.
gas form, and then it comes back and is turned into the uranium metal, which is needed potentially one day for a nuclear bomb, right? That's Isfahan?
Right. And so the uranium metal plant you're talking about actually is not like a production scale plant. They made small amounts of uranium metal in 2021, and then they stopped. But they were building like another larger production line. And so the Israelis think, I believe, that this might have been their only uranium metal capability. And so if it has been taken offline, that creates a significant bottleneck in their ability to make atomic weapons.
So if we assume that all three of these significantly hurt, we know Iraq, which is a non-active reactor, heavy water, also destroyed by Israel, and some other facilities like Parchin and others. But what would your estimate be for how long? Let's say Iran says, okay, we're going to rebuild, right? And we know they have the technical knowledge. We know that they have done this. They built it. It wasn't North Korea like in Syria or the French in Iraq. This is local domestic scientists. Some have now been killed, but there's more. How long would you estimate, in your expert opinion, it would take them to rebuild?
If we're talking about rebuilding it to the status that it was before the strikes, I think that would take many years because they don't have the equipment to make the centrifuges. They don't have all the supporting equipment for enrichment plants. They don't have the scientists. We know that around perhaps 14 of these men have been assassinated, the key people who would work on weaponization. A lot of the weaponization equipment has been lost, all the sites related to that. So I think if we're talking about cobbling together a crash nuclear weapons program, that's a different and a little bit scarier question because you only need some of the HEU. We know that maybe 10 bombs worth of HEU was kind of questionably on the loose. The Iranians had said that they had likely moved it maybe from the Isfahan tunnels. They could have even more than 10 quantities that they've stockpiled away. They could marry that with a secret enrichment plant with just several hundred advanced centrifuges, somewhere that we don't know about, perhaps even deeper under a mountain. And whether or not they could actually weaponize that material at this point is an open question. Perhaps they somehow have another supply chain of all the components that they would need, all the equipment to make atomic weapons. So that's the only black swan that I can really come up with, and that's something I think that the U.S. and Israel still need to pay attention to.
So if we assume, let's go with that scenario for a moment, that might be a prospect and a possibility, the so-called, I've heard it referred to as the bomb in the basement type of thing. What's needed beyond the destruction of infrastructure then is remove the will. And I've heard this argument, and I'm curious what you think, is that when you look at the world, and not many countries have nuclear weapons, but there's a nice little club right now. Every country that's wanted it has gotten it, paying a price with sanctions. Iran would be an interesting test because they now have come under a kinetic, attack, and we've yet to see countries attacked and come back from it. But the only two examples of countries that have willingly given up nuclear programs are South Africa and Libya, for that matter. But they did it willingly, right? And North Korea wanted it. They plowed through. The Indians, the Pakistanis, allegedly the Israelis, and anyone else who wanted it, they ended up getting it. So if Iran still has that will, is it safe to assume that it will happen eventually?
I really think that the US and Israel will not let that happen. I think that automatically leads to the question of regime change if they see that happening, or at least such sustained bombing efforts or efforts to undermine the regime that would not be possible. We never know what could happen as a surprise action, whether the Iranians could really pull something off. And we've seen the Russian former President Medvedev tweeting, I believe this morning or last night, that Russia's willing to give them nuclear weapons. I would take that with a grain of salt because I think he often drinks and tweets, perhaps. But we do have to think about surprise scenarios. We can't be too complacent, but I suspect that our military and intelligence eyes are all over this question, and that there will be efforts to strike any HEU stocks, even commando operations if necessary, and to ensure that all of this is stopped once and for all.
But because this possibility and prospect does exist, what that would potentially require then to remove the will, of course, is either regime change or potentially a new deal. What would that deal need to look like, in your opinion? And would you want to see American involvement in the inspection process as opposed to just relying on the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog?
I don't think we necessarily need American inspectors in there. Nationality matters less than the inspector's commitment to finding the truth. For example, we had a Russian inspector who uncovered Iran making near 84% enriched uranium a few years ago. And it's an open question whether Iran would let U.S. inspectors. But a deal, I think that the type that the president had originally offered more than 60 days ago when he gave Tehran that time to negotiate was full dismantlement. And so they would have to give up verifiably and permanently the weaponization, the enrichment, any plutonium production, and the missile delivery work that they had been working on for more than 2 decades. And we've seen thus far that the regime was basically willing to go to war and maybe even willing to be taken out fully rather than give up those assets. The enrichment capability is very entwined with the supreme leader's ideology. And it's very clear that they view it as a means to produce nuclear weapons fuel to safeguard them.
I find one of the things that's interesting, and I was thinking about this today, is that Israel has not bombed Bushehr, as an example. Neither have the Americans. And I think that underscores the message that is basically being sent. You guys want to have a civilian nuclear program, go for it. I mean, I was thinking back to Syria in 2007. When Israel bombed al-Kibar, there was that little Chinese research reactor that the Syrians had in Damascus. Israel didn't even bother bombing that because what is for civilian purposes is for civilian purposes. What's for military, and I think the enrichment part is often missed by people, is like as if, no, everybody needs enrichment. Can you explain to us why enrichment is something else? Why they can't be allowed to have enrichment?
Enrichment really gives the Iranians the option to produce nuclear fuel for weapons, which is what they always intended. Now, yes, they do have a small civilian component of that, and that's something that actually you can import. So, countries, around 23 of them, that have nuclear power simply import the fuel rods to run their reactors. They import radioisotopes for medicinal use. And so Iran does not need any of this. There are several reliable enrichment suppliers, such as the United States has a production line coming for commercial enrichment. France, Urenco, even China and Russia could provide any needed enriched uranium fuel. But what have we seen from Iran? Hiding its activities, working on nuclear weapons, building facilities and putting them under mountains. And also enriching to 60%, which has no civil use. So that puts them actually days from weapons grade or 90%. They were skirting along that line, trying not to get caught, but to position themselves very close to nuclear weapons. Enrichment is not necessary, and the US in particular works to decrease the spread of these fuel-making capabilities because of their proliferation significance.
If you had to guess right now, and I don't know, it's not easy. What do you think is going on now in the mind of Ali Khamenei? He's now been under attack by Israel for, what is it, about 8-9 days. The Americans now have gotten involved. He's reportedly in some bunker, barely communicating with people on the outside. He's lost his top military staff, and what is going through his mind beyond probably maybe an urge for revenge? But he's got to realize he's in a bit of a pickle here, no?
One would think that he is nearing the point where he realizes Iran needs to create some kind of an off ramp here, or take an off ramp, and perhaps even one given by the United States. The president has made clear that he's willing to negotiate, but he wants to see a full surrender. He wants to see the full dismantlement of remaining nuclear assets, verifiably. And it's up to the supreme leader at this point, or the people making decisions with him, what path they're going to take. Is it going to be more war, more destruction, or get a cessation of all these attacks?
What are your estimates, if at all? This is maybe a bit out of your scope, but you have been following Iran for a long time. What are your estimates about the prospect of a regime change? Personally, I'll just say I've been saying for the last week that Israel should be a bit humble about this. I think that getting involved in regime change can be a bit complicated and dirty. We've been able to achieve amazing things in Iran, considering the distance, the size, the scope of it. But we are still a very small country with limited capabilities. To think that we're going to engineer a country of 90 million and bring about something, we should be a little modest with that. But maybe it's a real possibility. I mean, do you see that we're on the brink? Do you see that it's just they need a little motivation, a push, or maybe it will just happen on its own?
I think we may see that down the line, but it doesn't look like it would happen anytime soon. We've seen the armed forces in Iran like really restricting the activities of Iranians and cracking down on security because they know that kind of activity could happen. So while Israel has hit some of the support institutions for the regime and weakened them, there's probably a long further set of steps and months before the Iranian people could really take power. U.S. and Israel definitely are humble that we can't create a new regime for the Iranians. That has to be something that the people decide. I hope that we will give them tools to do so. But in terms of boots on the ground or further taking out the leadership, that seems to be off the table for now.
So, Andrea, let me ask you just one last question. If Iran's nuclear program is finished and they are dismantling, what does someone like you do?
I would be so happy to retire from being an Iran expert. and turn to China, right? That's what everyone wants to do, is turn to China. So I would be more than happy to hang up my hat and focus on something else.
There's plenty of work out there. Andrea, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And again, to all of you who might have a little more of a wish to understand a deeper level of the nuclear technicalities and the ins and outs of what actually has been happening with Iran's nuclear program, I strongly recommend following Andrea on definitely on Twitter, where I follow her, but you can also get her at all what she writes at the FDD website. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll be back with more episodes of the Jewish People's Podcast as the week goes by.